It's a very gloomy day, but nothing can bring me down because the grad film I directed just got selected for its first festival, so I'm very happy. And I wore my poofiest sleeves because that felt most appropriate for this video somehow. I wanted to do a video of witchy recommendations, so books about witches, maybe films about witches. You know, screw it, I've got a film degree, let's actually use it. I'll recommend some films as well, just to get you in the mood for a spooky season. And my sleeves are definitely getting me in the witchy spooky mood. I can just imagine, like, you know, gliding through a dark corridor with like candles everywhere. I'm getting too into it again, but you know, it's just a vibe, isn't it? Also, these recommendation videos, I swear to God, are so difficult to do because I have to take out all of the books from my bookshelf and like plunder my shelves to find all of the ones that I have that I can recommend. It's stressful, so I hope you appreciate the efforts that I've gone to for this video. Okay, so I'm going to start with kind of YA/adult recommendations, then move into children's or middle grade, and then move into films. I have a plan, that's so rare for me. The first witchy book I'm going to recommend, which I've talked about before on this channel, is Cersei by Madeline Miller, which follows Cersei, which I don't know where I got this idea from, but I'm pretty sure it's right. I think Cersei is one of the first ever recorded witches in literature. Correct me if that's wrong, I need to actually Google that and stop saying it before I've Googled it. This follows Cersei, who is banished by her Greek god parent. Is it Zeus? I don't know. It's usually, like, if it's someone's shit, it's Zeus. But basically she is banished to a secluded island, and there she starts to experiment with her power and find out more about her relationship with the plants and nature and kind of making potions and elixirs, and she gets very in tune with like nature and everything. It's so nice to spend so much time in her head as well. It's just really interesting. It's very much a character driven novel where you spend the time really with her and you feel time passing and you feel that environment, and I really enjoyed it. Next up was one of my favourite ever short story collections, which is Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo, and this is a series of fairy tales and folk tales set in the world of the Grishaverse, which is Leigh Bardugo's kind of fantasy series that she wrote Shadow and Bone in, and also Six of Crows. But I don't think you have to have read either of those series to appreciate this. This is just a beautiful collection of magical, whimsical, dark, compelling fairy tales. I think they're so gorgeously written. They're also beautifully illustrated, and I just think Leigh Bardugo has such a way with words and atmosphere, and she draws on a lot of kind of famous folk tales, fairy tales, but they feel so fresh and her own, and I really loved this. Now, I did and ah whether or not to put this on the list, but it's Wicked, which is one of my favourite musicals, which is why I bought the book. I've seen the musical 3 times and I've loved it every time. I listen to the soundtrack all the time, so I bought the book, you know, because I wanted to read it, obviously, because I love the characters. It's very different, and maybe I tried to read it when I was too young, because I see a lot of love for this series, and I am curious to see, you know, obviously this is a series of books where the characters end up past the first novel and how it differs from the musical, probably a lot. I just remember it being a lot more political than I was ready for at the time, I think. The musical has shades of that, but it has mostly a kind of upbeat, charming, whimsical, magical energy, and this book was kind of missing that in the bit that I read, so I would be willing to give it another try. Yeah, it's been a while since I read it, so I can't really say much more about it. Another one which I wasn't sure if I wanted to put on was Uprooted. It's such a shit recommendations video. I'm like, oh, here's a book I didn't really like that much, but you might like it. I did like this book, I just didn't gel with it as most others did. That's such an awkward way of saying that. Basically, this book is very well loved. It's Uprooted by Naomi Novik, and it's about this little village which is by this big dangerous wood, and then there's this mysterious wizard called the Dragon, or is he a dragon who's a wizard? No, he's a wizard whose name is the Dragon, and he protects this little village from dark things in the woods. And then basically every 17 years, every so often, he takes a girl from the village and no one really knows what happens. And then we follow our main character, who is a girl in the village who inevitably gets picked to be the girl that the dragon takes away to his big scary castle. I remember really liking the magic system in this. I really liked that our main character doesn't just suddenly pick up magic because they're special. Like, there's actually a lot of scenes where our main character is learning about magic, and it's not academic, but it's a lot more, I don't want to say dry, but she doesn't just pick it up and then we're like, oh cool, magic. It actually takes a lot of work and time for her to hone that skill and that craft. It doesn't come to her easily, and I really like that element of it, which is why I'm putting it in the Witchy recommendations video, because I did like that element of magic being a skill that you build up and not just being predestined to it because of who you are and, you know, where you were born and everything. So I do recommend this, and I might reread this at some point because I do genuinely like the concept. Next up is Spellbook of the Lost and Found by Maura Fowley Doyle, and I remember really liking this book. I don't remember a lot of the details because I am genuinely the worst at remembering details, but the blurb says, one stormy summer night, Olive and her best friend Rose begin to lose things. It starts with simple items like hair clips and jewellery, but soon it's clear that Rose has lost something bigger, something she won't talk about. Then Olive meets 3 wild, mysterious strangers, Ivy, Hazel and Rowan. Like Rose, they're mourning losses and holding tight to secrets. When they discover an ancient spellbook full of hand-inked charms to conjure back lost things, they realise it must be their chance to set everything right. Unless it's leading them towards secrets that were never meant to be found. So I remember really liking this. I think it seamlessly blends YA and magic, which I really, really appreciate. So the young characters felt like actual teenagers that had really kind of trivial teen worries about like who they had crushes on and what was happening at school. But then also concurrent with that was this storyline about lost things and ancient magic waking up, and I really enjoyed that. I remember this being really atmospheric and really liking the characters. Oh my god, why have I put so many books on here that I didn't enjoy that much? To be fair, just because I didn't enjoy certain books does not mean that you watching will not enjoy them. So I'll recommend them anyway, and if they're bad, I'm sorry. So the next 2 books that kind of fall into this category of I didn't really enjoy them that much, but you might enjoy them, are The Price Guide to the Occult by Leslie Walton and The Graces by Laura Eve. This one, I don't know if it was because I loved this author's debut novel so much. She wrote The Strange Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender, which I talk about all the bloody time. I adore that book. It's one of my favourites. So when this came out and it was about witches, I was so hyped. And then I was very disappointed because this kind of reads like a bit of a generic YA novel to me. It has the kind of emo, edgy boy. It has this kind of, you know, cool setting. There's a mystery surrounding her mother, but then it presents itself quite early on in the book, so I wasn't really like hooked in that respect. I kind of knew where it was headed, and then it did head there. And it's one of those books where like the big conflict that's set up all the way throughout the book is then resolved quite easily at the end, and that always annoys me. But why have I said all that? And I'm like, but I recommend it. I don't know. I think maybe if I hadn't read her first novel and fallen in love with it, I wouldn't have hyped this up so much. So maybe if you go into it with kind of normal expectations and maybe you haven't read a witchy book before, this probably would be a good place to start. Another one is The Graces, which I don't think I disliked. I think I enjoyed it, but just not enough to carry on with the series because I think this is either a duology or a trilogy. But this again is about school setting, and there's this group of mysterious popular people at school who basically the main character starts to think that they might be witches, and then obviously they turn out to be witches because why else would it be about them? So the back says, everyone says the Graces were witches, I was going to make them mine. So it's about this main character, and she gets a little bit obsessed with this kind of popular group at school, the rumours surrounding them. And I remember enjoying it. I remember it being quite slow, but I enjoyed that. But then I feel like the big finale just didn't merit enough for me to want to carry on, if that makes sense. But some other people might feel different, so. Next up is Hollow Pike by Gino Dawson, and I read this years and years ago, like just when I was getting into booktube, so like 5-6 years ago. I remember I bought this at an event that I went to at London South Bank, I think, and I met Ben from Benjamin of Tomes there, and I think we had a very brief conversation about this book. I don't really remember, but I remember enjoying this reading experience. It's about a girl who moves to a new village that's kind of weird and mysterious, and she starts having strange nightmares, and obviously it ends up to be witches or witchcraft. I do not remember a lot of the details, but again, if you're someone who is wanting to kind of break into the witch genre, this might be a good starter for you because it's a nice, quick, atmospheric read, and I think that's always a good place to start. Next up is a book I literally read very recently, so this month, so I can actually talk about it and be specific in the details. This is Perfectly Preventable Deaths by Deirdre Sullivan, and it follows these twin sisters who move to this very small secluded village in Ireland called Ballyfran, and they live in this old castle that belongs to their stepdad, and it's very atmospheric. It's very kind of dreamy. I really liked that. I really liked the atmosphere, and again, it's one of those books where I could kind of tell where it was headed pretty early on, but the writing is so beautiful that I just enjoyed the journey of figuring out kind of where we were headed, if that makes sense. So I do recommend this. I enjoyed this a lot. And now onto children's books, or middle grade if you're American, I think. But yeah, first one is Howl's Moving Castle, which I didn't read as a child, but it has the vibes, as they say. Movie is also incredible. I love the film so much, but I remember really enjoying this when I read it. Hello? It has witches and magical lands and moving castles and portals and magic and hills and magic. It's a fun adventure, and I can't imagine anyone not liking this. Next up is School for Good and Evil, which I haven't read yet, but I want to. It's about a magic school for witches, so very exciting. Next up, some childhood faves. Glub Slime by Jacqueline Wilson, which I read centuries ago, so damn it if I can tell you what it's about. I think it's about this girl at school. She has an argument with her friend, and then she meets a talking toad, but that has something to do with witches. Yeah, because the toad is from the witch's pond and has like seen like years and years of history. I remember liking this. It might be a good gift for like your witchy nieces and nephews or younger siblings or whatever. Classic The Witches by Roald Dahl, which has just got a new adaptation on HBO Max, which I'm excited to watch because Anne Hathaway is playing the Grand High Witch and she looks incredible, as always. I love her. And then of course The Worst Witch by Jill Murphy. I loved this series as a kid. I devoured these books. These are just fun children's adventure books, but also I'd say Roald Dahl is an author that I love because he doesn't stray from the harshness of the world as well. The witches in The Witches are really quite evil, and he really doesn't stray away from showing kids that the world can be cruel and evil for no reason at all. And I really appreciate that. I think, you know, obviously it's quite harsh lesson for children to learn, but I think he does it in a way that makes it seem fun and also instills beliefs that, you know, the world can be cruel, but you can also overcome it. I don't know, I really love Roald Dahl. I love The Witches. I really would recommend this. This is kind of a great primer for literally anyone. And then we've got some Neil Gaiman, because of course. Stardust, which I think the novel is more geared towards adults. I remember it being a bit darker than the movie, which I love. But this has some great witches and witchcraft and magic in it, as we've come to expect from Neil. And then also Coraline. And I don't think the other mother is actually set like named in the text as a witch, but they call her the Beldam, and I think that's kind of similar. She's just this evil entity that like pulls the strings, and this is just a really beautiful, atmospheric, witchy feeling type book, so I would recommend it. Also gonna just shout out some like actual children's picture books that I loved when I was a kid about witches. So I really loved Room on the Broom, which is obviously a really classic book by Julie Donaldson, who also wrote The Gruffalo. But Room on the Broom is like a really fun little story told in verse. And yeah, coming up to Halloween, if you want to gently introduce your little children into, you know, the world of magic and witchcraft, that's a nice way to go. Also, Winnie the Witch, which is incredible. Even now I look back at those illustrations in complete awe. I think it's gorgeous. The illustrations are so detailed and beautiful, and it was such a comforting read for me as a kid. I loved it. The books are really fun and the illustrations are so detailed, and I would literally pore over them as a kid. I would spend hours and hours looking at every single detail, every single object in her little witchy tower, and I really recommend those for children. It's so good. So I'm also gonna talk about some witch books that I have not read and do not own, but God bless the online book community for putting these books on my radar, so I'm going to talk about them so I don't forget. So I can come back to my own video in a couple of months and be like, oh yes, I was meant to read that. So there's The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow, which I've seen so much hype about and I really want to read it. I've seen it described as the suffragettes meets witches. So like, women, am I right? Women. I also really want to check out The Year of the Witching, which has a gorgeous cover. I love it. And from what I can tell, it's kind of like The Crucible. So it's this girl in like a small oppressive town, and she starts to discover that she has these dark powers and obviously can't really reveal them to the people around her. I don't know much about it, but I think witchy books are almost the perfect ones to go in blind, right? Because you don't know how the magic is going to present itself. And having studied The Crucible at school and not being that into it, I like the concept. We ended up having to do it in drama and it just got very tedious, and a lot of irritating people ended up playing the main parts and it was just annoying, right? So I'm hoping that this will be a revamp of that kind of story that I can really get behind. I also really want to check out A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness, and I think they adapted this into a TV show a while back, but the aesthetic just seemed gorgeous because it's set in Oxford. And as we all know from his Dark Materials, the Oxford setting is god tier. It's gorgeous. And it has witches. I'm like very easily sold on stuff. I'll just hear like suffragettes, witches, yes. Oxford, witches, yes. Like I hear something and witches and I'm on board. So those are some books I'm really excited for and you should keep on your radar as well. And now onto the films, and I totally understand if you're only subscribed for book content and I want to kind of nope out at this point. But you know what? Film is my other complete passion in life. It's what I want to do with my life, is make films and talk about films and watch films. So I'm gonna maybe think about integrating it a little bit more in this channel. Obviously there will still be book videos, don't panic, but I was just thinking about maybe doing some film recommendations occasionally or doing the odd film review. Please let me know if that's something you'd be interested in, because obviously if no one wants that, I won't do it. So it'll be real awkward if you said no, I don't want that, because I'm about to go and recommend some films. So my first film recommendation is The Craft, made in 1996. So it's a 90s movie, it's very dramatic, it's very stylish, it's very camp, very silly. It leans towards horror, but I'd say it's a bit more of a kind of, I don't know, it has some horror elements, but it's much more of a kind of fun, campy adventure. I think the aesthetic of the film is really, really cool, and it's definitely one to put you in that creepy mood. They have remade it. Don't know if the remake's good, but I would urge you to check out the original first. Another one that I love is Practical Magic, which I only watched once about 3 years ago, so again I'm quite sketchy on the details, but I just remember it having such a lovely family vibe. So it centres around this family curse and these two sisters dealing with the ramifications of that family curse, and I think the curse is if they fall in love, that person will die. So it's about these sisters banding together and having to rely on their bond to kind of fulfill their life and be enough. And I remember loving it, and it has a Stevie Nicks song on the soundtrack, and I think you're legally obligated if you're making something about witches to have a Stevie Nicks song on the soundtrack, because how could you not? She just perfectly encapsulates that dreamy, like ethereal vibe. I love Stevie Nicks so much, which is also why you should watch American Horror Story Season 3 Coven, which is about witches, and Stevie Nicks plays a character in that, and it's all kinds of fabulous. I love it. Also there's a bunch of adaptations of the books that I've mentioned in this video, so those are also worth checking out, such as Coraline, Stardust, Howl's Moving Castle. I'm looking around, what else have I mentioned? That's kind of it. Oh, The Witches, yeah. That's an iconic one, obviously. Another film which I'm going to recommend despite not having watched it, which is so stupid because it seems like it's perfect for me, is Hocus Pocus. I've never watched it. I need to. This Halloween I'm rectifying that. I'm going to watch Hocus Pocus. I also love Suspiria, which is a strange film in a lot of ways. It's very slow and very colourful, beautiful, gorgeous, the soundtrack iconic, but it's very stylized, so if you're not into that, respect, I get it, but for those that are, it's just delicious, so good. And I'm talking about the one from, is it the 80s? Well, I need to start learning when films are made, isn't that what film school is for? from 1977, directed by Dario Argento. That's the Suspiria that I recommend. I did like Luca Guadagnino kind of reboot, but I do prefer the original one. If you want some fun witchy films that I guess more aimed at children, I really love Kiki's Delivery Service. Obviously a classic. Howl's Moving Castle. Brave, I mean, I grew up in Scotland and I love witches. That film was just made for me. I love Brave. The experience of seeing Brave in the cinema is so glued into my mind because I was literally the only adult in a cinema of just families just crying, being like, Scotland! It was quite an emotional time. And also Twitches, which is like a Disney Channel original movie, which does not hold up, I bet, but I remember being obsessed with Twitches when I was little and just living the fantasy of having like an estranged twin out there that I one day might meet, and then it turns out we're magic. Like, that's just what everyone wants. Everybody wants to meet an estranged sibling, and then it turns out you're both from this magic land. Amazing! Like, how cool is that? So those are some of the witchy books and some of the witchy films that I have loved all throughout my life, through my young childhood days to my, you know, early teens and then to my adult self. You know, I've got like witch books for each age and they're all iconic. I love them. If you have any recommendations for witchy content in any form, films, books, radio plays, I don't know where that came from, radio plays, please let me know in the comments. I would love to check them out, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye.